In my first video, I will be talking about what is talent and how do we identify and nurture it. So how do we define talent? Well, Simonton 1999 argues that talent is best thought of as any package of personal characteristics that accelerates the acquisition of expertise or enhances performance given a certain amount of expertise. In other words, talent allows a person to get better faster or get more bang for their buck out of a given amount of expertise. Abbott et al. 2005 describes how talented performers are not completely reliant on the isolation of one factor. They instead employ the multidisciplinary approach, which states that a range of factors, such as genetical, psychological, and practice-based improvement, all play their own role in talent development. Simonton 1999 also describes in his work that talent is nonlinear, and if it is not nurtured continuously, then the performer will see a drop in their performance levels. He also states that performance levels inevitably slow down with older age, but the levels it can decrease by completely depend on the multidisciplinary factors stated previously. An example of this in football is Ronaldo Nazario, who won his final Ballon d'Or aged 26, whereas Cristiano Ronaldo won his final Ballon d'Or in 2017 aged 32. These players were both considered by many to be the finest of their generation, and some would argue that R9 was a more naturally talented player than CR7. Therefore, there can be little argument for talent being the reason for the gulf in ages between wins. This proves that factors such as genetics and psychological reasons came into play here, with CR7 staying relatively injury-free, whereas R9 struggled with genetic knee injuries. CR7 has also had a better lifestyle, which contributed to his longevity. Jones 1999 states that the transmission of genetic information between generations always contains some errors, and therefore genes cannot work in a totally deterministic fashion. This means that genetic material on paper may seem ideal, however this serves as no guarantee for future success. In essence, the presence of the ideal genetic material does not necessarily represent a blueprint for success in sport. Furthermore, as Simonton 1999's model indicates, talented performance results from the interaction of genetic factors and a conducive practice environment rather than the simply basis of one of these factors. Helson et al. 2000. This means that if, for example, a sporting academy chose to look at signing players based on their genetic factors, then they are likely to eliminate many potentially talented individuals. Gagne's differentiated model of giftedness and talent aims to clearly explain the difference between gifts, natural abilities, and talents, systematically developed from gifts. Gagne states that all talents are developed from natural abilities that can be influenced by inner and outer catalysts. The three catalysts inside his model are environmental factors such as culture and family, provisions, programs, activities, services, and events, intrapersonal factors, which are several characteristics of the person influence the learning process positively or negatively. These are physical characteristics like health, motivation and volition, self-management, and personality, which is things like temperament, self-esteem, and adaptability. One last factor in influencing the catalysts is chance. Most importantly, chance determines through the recombination of paternal genes which types of giftedness a child possesses and to what extent. The central idea in Gagne's model is development, and the fact that identifying talent is not enough alone to guarantee sporting prowess and success. For the player to reach their maximum potential of development, all three catalysts must be nurtured by the coaches in charge to ensure optimum development levels. Much like Simonton, Gagne also agrees that talent can be lost. However, Gagne believes that if one of his catalysts is hindered, then the whole model will begin to fail. An example of this would be recent Brighton midfielder Mwepu, who had to retire prematurely despite his natural talent due to a heart concern. This was an intrapersonal catalyst. Another example could fall under the environmental catalyst. If a player's family has to move to a different part of the country, for example, a footballer from Sheffield, a city that has multiple St George's Parks, development pitches, and many routes to footballing success, to a rural area in the Yorkshire Dales where there are no local facilities and little to no Sunday League teams, this would hinder development, as this would remove the environmental pillar from the model and thus would collapse the rest of the model. Next we're going to talk about Ericsson's 10,000 hour model. Ericsson 1990 says that it takes 10,000 hours, or 20 hours for 50 weeks a year for 10 years, of deliberate practice to become an expert in almost anything. However, this model is flawed, as it was based on musicians and therefore has little relevance to talent mastery in a sporting context. However, this is not to say that after 10,000 hours of deliberate practice you wouldn't improve the skill you trained, as you surely would. But an example of where this method is flawed is a footballer who could solely practice 10,000 hours of free kicks, but then when it came to game time, he would be out of his depth due to the fact he has only one specific skill in a game that requires a wide plethora of differentiating skills. This also heavily differs from Gagne's multidisciplinary approach, as it does not account for things like athlete injuries or other physical setbacks. Essentially, while Ericsson's theory may work effectively for musicians, it is way too narrow for the sporting field, and therefore can come across very misleading to players and coaches who may look to integrate this theory into their practice. Ollis and Sproule 2007 backs up this notion through their piece of academia, in which they explain how sporting athletes take a nonlinear path to success, and that success itself is nonlinear, as one athlete's success may be another athlete's starting point.